She pulled 12 dying wolves from freezing water, never imagining the last one would one day crown her as his queen. Hello everyone, and welcome. Before we begin today's story, we have one small request. Please subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our new videos. It only takes a moment. It is completely free, and your support helps us continue creating dramatic, heartfelt stories like this one. We truly appreciate every one of you. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. We always enjoy seeing how far our stories reach and learning where our viewers are joining us from today. Now let us begin today's story. Sometimes destiny does not arrive wearing a crown. Sometimes it is shivering beneath the ice, waiting for the only heart brave enough to reach it. The wind screamed across the frozen river with enough force to make every tree along the shoreline groan beneath layers of fresh snow. The people of Ashridge village stood at a safe distance, their heavy coats wrapped tightly around their shoulders as they watched the dark shapes trapped beneath the crystal surface. 12 wolves. Their powerful bodies lay scattered beneath the thick ice where the current had betrayed them during the night. Some barely moved. Others remained completely still. Fear spread faster than the storm itself. No one dared step onto the cracking river. They whispered that the ice was cursed, that anyone who ventured too far would disappear beneath the freezing water before another soul could pull them back. Among the frightened crowd stood Claire Bennett, a young Omega whose quiet kindness had always been mistaken for weakness. Her long dark blonde hair escaped from beneath her wool hood as icy wind brushed loose strands across her pale face. Her hazel eyes never left the trapped animals. While everyone else counted the danger, Claire counted 12 lives. An elderly man reached for her arm before she could take another step. He pleaded with her to stay away, reminding her that she was too small, too gentle, too ordinary to survive water cold enough to steal a person's breath within minutes. Claire offered him a grateful smile, but her eyes returned to the river. She had spent her entire life listening to people explain what she could not do. None of those words mattered now. Those wolves could not save themselves. She slowly removed her heavy cloak, laid it across a nearby rock, and stepped onto the frozen surface. Every footstep echoed through the silent valley. Tiny fractures spread beneath her boots, drawing frightened gasps from the villagers behind her. The wind carried their warnings away before she could hear every word. She knelt beside the nearest crack and pressed both hands against the ice. The wolf below barely opened its tired eyes before closing them again. Claire searched the riverbank until she found a thick fallen branch. Holding it tightly with both hands, she struck the ice again and again. The frozen surface resisted at first, then finally surrendered with a sharp crack. Freezing water burst upward, soaking her sleeves as she reached into the river without hesitation. The cold shocked every muscle in her body, but she refused to pull away. She wrapped both arms around the exhausted wolf and slowly guided it toward the opening. The animal was far heavier than she expected. Her boots slipped against the ice more than once. Yet she continued pulling with quiet determination until the wolf finally climbed onto solid ground. The villagers stared in disbelief as the animal struggled to its feet before slowly walking away from the river. Claire barely paused long enough to catch her breath. 11 more shapes still waited beneath the frozen water. Snow continued falling around her while the river stretched endlessly into the white distance. Somewhere beneath the deepest section of ice, hidden from every frightened eye on the shore, one enormous silver wolf remained perfectly still, and neither Claire nor anyone watching could imagine that the final life she was about to fight for would forever change the destiny of an entire kingdom. Claire Bennett remained on her knees beside the opening she had broken through the ice, drawing one slow breath after another while freezing water dripped from her sleeves onto the cracked surface beneath her. Her hands trembled from the cold, but her eyes never wandered away from the river. 11 lives still waited below. Behind her, the first wolf she had rescued stood several yards away, breathing steadily now. Instead of disappearing into the forest, it turned back toward the river as though refusing to leave until the others were safe. Claire slowly pushed herself to her feet and moved toward the next shadow trapped beneath the frozen current. Every careful step caused new cracks to stretch across the ice, forcing another wave of worried whispers from the villagers gathered along the shore. An older woman covered her face with both hands, unable to watch any longer, while several men argued quietly about whether they should help. Yet none of them crossed onto the river. Fear held them in place more tightly than the winter itself. Claire reached another motionless wolf beneath the clear ice and lifted the fallen branch once more. She struck the frozen surface again and again until another opening appeared. The icy water surged upward, stealing the warmth from her fingers almost instantly. She leaned into the freezing current and carefully wrapped both arms around the exhausted animal. It barely responded at first. For one frightening moment, she wondered if she had arrived too late. Then the wolf released a weak breath and slowly pressed against her shoulder. Claire smiled despite the bitter cold. That tiny movement was enough. She pulled with every ounce of strength she possessed until the animal finally reached solid ice and crawled towards safety. The second rescued wolf stood beside the first. Neither showed fear. Neither growled. They simply watched Claire continue her impossible task. One by one, she crossed the frozen river. One by one, the openings widened beneath her determined hands. Each rescue became harder than the last as exhaustion settled deep into her muscles. Her soaked dress clung heavily to her legs, and every breath escaped invisible clouds beneath the falling snow. Still, every time she looked beneath the ice and saw another pair of weary eyes searching upward, she found enough strength to keep moving. Time seemed to disappear. The storm softened into quiet snowfall, while the line of rescued wolves steadily grew along the riverbank. Their thick coats shimmered beneath fresh snow as they remained together in complete silence, almost like loyal guardians standing watch over the young woman who had refused to abandon them. Even the villagers noticed the strange calm surrounding the animals. There was no panic, no aggression, only patient waiting. Claire finally rescued the 11th wolf, just as the fading afternoon light painted the frozen valley with pale shades of silver and blue. She rested one hand against her chest, struggling to steady her breathing while looking across the river. Only one shadow remained beneath the deepest stretch of ice. It was far larger than any of the others. Unlike the wolves she had already saved, this one had not moved even once. Thick layers of frozen water concealed most of its enormous body, but one detail caught Claire's attention immediately. Around its neck rested an elegant silver collar unlike anything she had ever seen, its surface reflecting the last light of day through the crystal ice. She had no idea what it represented. To her, it was simply another life waiting for someone to care enough to try. Without allowing doubt another chance to speak, Claire tightened her grip around the weathered branch and began walking toward the largest patch of unbroken ice, unaware that every step carried her closer to the greatest turning point her quiet life had ever known. Claire Bennett stopped only a few feet from the largest sheet of untouched ice and slowly lowered herself onto one knee. The wind had grown quieter, as though the valley itself had begun holding its breath. Snow drifted gently around her, while the 11 rescued wolves stood together along the riverbank without making a sound. Their eyes remained fixed upon the final figure beneath the frozen water. Claire brushed fresh snow away with the sleeve of her soaked dress until the clear surface revealed the enormous silver wolf resting below. He was unlike any animal she had ever seen. His thick silver fur shimmered beneath the pale winter light, and the elegant collar around his neck reflected delicate patterns across the ice. Although his powerful body remained perfectly still, there was something peaceful about his expression, as if even in exhaustion he carried quiet strength. Claire placed one hand against the frozen surface. The ice felt colder than anything she had ever touched, yet she could almost imagine a faint heartbeat waiting somewhere below. She whispered softly that she was not leaving him behind. The words disappeared into the winter air, but speaking them gave her renewed courage. She searched for the strongest place to strike and lifted the heavy branch with both hands. The first impact echoed across the valley without leaving more than a shallow mark. She struck again. Tiny fractures spread like delicate silver threads beneath the snow. She steadied herself and continued, refusing to surrender to exhaustion. At last a deep crack raced across the surface, followed by another, until the thick sheet finally gave way. Freezing water surged upward, splashing across her face and shoulders. Claire immediately reached through the opening, stretching as far as she could until her fingers found the silver collar. It was smooth and finely crafted, far too elegant for an ordinary wild animal, but she did not stop to wonder why. She carefully shifted her grip beneath the wolf's neck instead, encouraging him toward the opening with every bit of strength she still possessed. At first nothing happened. Then, almost too gently to notice, the giant wolf slowly opened his silver eyes. They were calm, intelligent, and filled with quiet awareness. Instead of struggling, he looked directly at Claire as though memorizing the face of the stranger who had refused to abandon him. A slow breath escaped him, sending a trail of tiny bubbles toward the surface. Gathering the last of her strength, Claire leaned backward. The wolf responded by pushing against the riverbed with his remaining energy. Together they closed the impossible distance until his head emerged through the broken ice. Water streamed from his magnificent coat as he slowly climbed onto the frozen surface. Claire lost her footing and slipped onto one knee, breathing hard from complete exhaustion. Before she could stand, the enormous silver wolf turned toward her. For one long moment, they simply looked at one another. There was no fear in his eyes, only quiet gratitude that seemed far older than either of them. Then something extraordinary happened. One after another, the 11 rescued wolves approached across the snow. Without a single sound, every one of them lowered its head before the great silver wolf. The villagers gasped in disbelief, unable to understand what they were witnessing. Claire stared at the silent gathering with equal confusion, unaware that the gesture unfolding before her was not simple loyalty. It was the ancient respect reserved only for the true ruler of every wolf in the kingdom, and the stranger whose life she had just saved carried a destiny far greater than she could possibly imagine. The valley remained wrapped in complete silence as the 11 wolves kept their heads lowered before the great silver wolf. Even the wind seemed unwilling to disturb the moment. Claire Bennett slowly rose to her feet, her soaked clothes clinging heavily to her body while tiny clouds of breath escaped into the cold evening air. She looked from one wolf to another, unable to understand why creatures that moments ago had been fighting for survival now stood with such calm discipline. The enormous silver wolf lifted his head with quiet dignity. Although exhaustion still weighed upon him, there was unmistakable authority in every movement he made. His silver eyes met Claire's once again, and for a brief moment, she felt as though he wished he could speak. Before either of them could move another step, a distant sound echoed across the snowy hills. Hooves pounded against frozen ground in perfect rhythm. The villagers turned toward the forest as dark figures emerged through the falling snow. A dozen riders wearing polished silver armor guided powerful horses down the narrow trail with remarkable speed. Each carried a long banner embroidered with the image of a silver wolf beneath a winter crown. As soon as they reached the edge of the river, every rider dismounted almost at once. Their eyes searched desperately across the frozen landscape until they found the magnificent silver wolf standing beside Claire. Relief immediately replaced the fear written across their faces. Without hesitation, the soldiers dropped to one knee in the snow. Their captain lowered his head and spoke with deep respect. "Your Majesty." The single phrase drifted across the silent valley like a whisper carried by fate itself. Confused murmurs spread through the villagers. Claire blinked, convinced she had misunderstood what she had heard. She looked back at the silver wolf just as a warm silver light slowly surrounded him. It shimmered gently rather than brightly, flowing like moonlight across fresh snow. The enormous wolf quietly stepped forward, and before the astonished eyes of everyone gathered along the river, the graceful form of a man emerged where the wolf had stood only moments before. He was tall and composed despite visible exhaustion. His white shoulder-length hair rested against a dark winter cloak, and his silver eyes carried the same calm wisdom Claire had seen beneath the ice. Around his neck remained the elegant silver collar, now revealed as a finely crafted royal necklace. The captain bowed even lower. "Alpha King Alexander Hawthorne, we have searched every forest, every mountain pass, and every frozen river since the storm began." Alexander offered only a gentle nod before turning toward Claire. His expression was not proud. It was deeply grateful. He stepped closer, careful not to alarm the young Omega who still struggled to understand what had happened. "You crossed a river that everyone else feared," he said softly. "You reached for someone you believed was only another life in need of help. You never asked who I was. You never expected anything in return. Claire lowered her eyes for a moment before quietly answering with complete honesty. I did not see a king. I only saw someone who needed another chance. A peaceful smile appeared across Alexander's face, one filled with genuine admiration rather than royal formality. Around them, the 11 wolves slowly raised their heads, and every member of the royal wolf guard watched the young Omega with silent respect. The frightened villagers who had once believed Claire was too small, too gentle, and too ordinary now looked upon her with entirely different eyes, realizing that the greatest strength they had witnessed that day had never come from power at all. It had come from a heart that refused to leave another soul behind. The journey to Silver Keep began before the last light disappeared beyond the snowy mountains. Claire Bennett rode inside a warm carriage provided by the Royal Wolf Guard, although she still felt as though she belonged back in her small village instead of traveling beside the ruler of an entire kingdom. Fresh clothes and a thick wool cloak had been offered to her after the rescue. Yet she could not stop thinking about the frozen river and the 12 wolves whose lives had nearly ended beneath the ice. Every time the carriage window revealed one of those majestic animals running peacefully alongside the royal procession, she smiled quietly to herself. Across from her sat Alexander Hawthorne. Without his royal armor, he appeared less like a distant king and more like a thoughtful man carrying responsibilities that reached far beyond himself. He noticed Claire watching the snowy forest passing outside the window and spoke gently. Most people spend their lives hoping to meet a king. You rescued one without asking his name. Claire laughed softly before lowering her eyes. If I had known who you were, I would have done exactly the same thing. Alexander studied her expression for a long moment. There was no pride in her answer and no expectation of reward. It was simply the truth. The convoy continued climbing through mountain roads until the towering walls of Silverkeep appeared above the trees. Massive stone towers reached toward the evening sky, their windows glowing with warm golden light that reflected beautifully across the fresh snow. Large iron gates slowly opened as trumpets echoed through the valley. Royal guards stood in perfect formation while servants hurried across the courtyard preparing for their king's return. Yet as the procession entered the palace grounds, curious eyes immediately settled upon the unfamiliar young Omega riding beside the Alpha King. Quiet conversations spread through the courtyard before Claire even stepped onto the stone walkway. She noticed elegant noble families exchanging puzzled glances. Some appeared surprised. Others seemed openly doubtful. Their expensive clothing and confident posture made Claire feel painfully aware of the simple village dress she now wore beneath the borrowed cloak. She instinctively took one small step backward, hoping to remain unnoticed. Alexander immediately recognized the hesitation in her eyes. You belong here as my honored guest, he said calmly. Claire offered a polite smile, although uncertainty remained within her heart. Your Majesty, I am grateful for your kindness, but I do not belong in a palace. I only did what anyone should have done. Before Alexander could answer, an elderly nobleman approached with several members of the royal court. His formal bow was respectful toward the king, but noticeably restrained when his eyes moved toward Claire. Your Majesty, he began carefully. The council has gathered to welcome your safe return. They are surprised by your companion. Alexander remained completely composed. Then the council will have an opportunity to learn why she walks beside me. The nobleman nodded, although the uncertainty upon his face did not disappear. As Claire followed the king through magnificent marble halls lined with silver banners and towering windows, she admired the beauty surrounding her, yet every polished floor and crystal chandelier only reminded her how different her own life had been. She quietly wondered how long it would be before everyone realized a simple Omega from a forgotten village had no place among nobles and rulers. Outside the palace walls, the 12 wolves settled peacefully upon the snowy hillside overlooking Silverkeep, refusing to leave. Their silent presence beneath the moonlit sky would soon become a reminder to the entire kingdom that true honor could be recognized not by birth or title, but by the quiet courage of a compassionate heart. The following morning, the bells of Silverkeep echoed across the snow-covered courtyards as nobles from every corner of the kingdom gathered inside. The Grand Council Hall. Claire Bennett paused outside the enormous oak doors, taking a slow breath before stepping inside. Sunlight poured through towering stained glass windows, casting shimmering patterns across polished marble floors and silver banners that honored generations of Alpha Kings. The room was more magnificent than anything she had imagined, yet she could not ignore the feeling that every pair of eyes immediately turned toward her. Quiet conversations drifted across the hall as members of the royal court examined the young Omega standing beside their king. Some looked curious, others seemed uncertain. A few offered polite smiles, while several whispered behind respectful expressions. Claire lowered her gaze, wishing she could disappear into the crowd rather than become its center of attention. Alexander Hawthorne noticed her discomfort before anyone else. He stepped forward with calm confidence, his voice carrying naturally throughout the hall without ever becoming harsh. Today we gather not only because I have returned safely, but because this kingdom must remember something greater than tradition. The whispers faded into complete silence. Alexander turned toward Claire before looking back at the council. Yesterday, while many believed hope had disappeared beneath frozen water, one young woman chose compassion instead of fear. She crossed a river that everyone else believed could not be crossed. She asked no questions about names, titles, or rewards. She simply refused to leave another life behind. Several nobles exchanged thoughtful glances, yet one respected council member slowly rose from his seat. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "no one questions her courage. However, courage alone has never determined who stands beside the throne. Noble blood has guided our kingdom for centuries." Alexander nodded with quiet respect, showing no anger toward the question. Instead, he walked to the center of the hall where every person could clearly see him. "Then let us ask a different question," he replied. "What makes someone truly noble?" The room remained silent. One advisor answered that honor came through family heritage. Another believed wisdom came through education. A third insisted that leadership belonged only to those born into responsibility. Alexander listened patiently to every answer before speaking once more. Yesterday, none of those things broke the ice. None of those things entered freezing water. None of those things saved a stranger whose name was unknown. Compassion acted before status could even introduce itself. Claire felt every word settle gently within her heart. She had never imagined that her simple decision would become the subject of an entire royal council. She quietly stepped forward and spoke with complete sincerity. "Your Majesty, I do not wish for anyone to praise me. I only hope that if another person ever needs help, someone will choose kindness instead of hesitation." Her words carried no performance, only quiet honesty. For several moments, no one spoke. Then the captain of the Royal Wolf Guard stepped into the center of the hall and respectfully bowed. "Every word His Majesty has spoken is true. We arrived only after she had rescued all 12 wolves alone. Had she waited for recognition, our king would not be standing before us today." The atmosphere inside the chamber slowly changed. Expressions once shaped by doubt softened into thoughtful respect. Some nobles lowered their eyes in quiet reflection, while others looked toward Claire with admiration they had not expected to feel. Alexander saw the change unfolding around the room and understood that hearts were beginning to open, not because they had been forced to change, but because genuine kindness had quietly accomplished what authority alone never could. The meeting ended, but the thoughtful silence it created remained long after the council members left the Grand Council Hall. Claire Bennett quietly walked through the palace corridors alone, her footsteps echoing across polished marble floors as the golden light of late afternoon spilled through tall windows overlooking the snow-covered mountains. Every servant she passed greeted her with unexpected kindness, yet she still felt like a visitor wandering through a world that belonged to someone else. She paused beside one of the windows and watched the 12 wolves resting peacefully beyond the palace walls. They had not returned to the forest. Instead, they remained together upon the snowy hillside, as though waiting for something that had not yet happened. Claire smiled softly before lowering her eyes. She knew the kingdom would eventually return to its ordinary rhythm, and when that happened, she believed it was time for her to return home as well. She found Alexander Hawthorne standing alone inside the palace library, surrounded by shelves filled with histories that stretched back hundreds of years. He looked up as she entered and immediately recognized the quiet determination upon her face. Before he could speak, Claire gently folded her hands together. "Your Majesty, You have shown me more kindness than I ever expected to receive. I will always be grateful. But tomorrow morning, I would like to return to Ashridge village." Alexander remained silent for a moment, surprised not by her request, but by the peaceful certainty behind it. "You wish to leave?" he asked quietly. Claire nodded. "My neighbors still need help gathering firewood before the deepest part of winter arrives. There are children who depend upon the village school, and there are elderly families who cannot carry water alone. My life is there. I never crossed the river hoping to find a place inside a palace." Alexander studied her expression carefully. There was no disappointment in her voice, no hidden expectation that he might persuade her to stay with promises of comfort or wealth. She simply wished to return to the simple life she loved. Before he could answer, several council members entered the library to discuss preparations for the coming winter festival. They stopped when they noticed Claire standing beside the king. One of the younger nobles looked at her with genuine curiosity. "You intend to leave after everything that has happened?" Claire smiled warmly. "I came here because His Majesty invited me as his guest. I do not believe kindness should become a reason to seek a greater position than the one life has already given me." Those simple words spread through the room more powerfully than any formal speech. The nobles exchanged quiet glances, realizing that the young Omega truly desired nothing for herself. She had rescued a stranger without expecting gratitude, accepted the king's invitation without seeking influence, and now wished to leave without asking for a single reward. Outside, a gentle howl drifted across the evening sky. Everyone turned toward the windows. The 12 wolves had risen together, standing proudly upon the snowy hillside overlooking Silver Keep. Their calm presence seemed almost symbolic, reminding every person inside the palace that loyalty could not be purchased and genuine character could not be measured by titles. Alexander looked from the wolves to Claire and understood something that had become impossible to ignore. A person who never reached for power was often the one most worthy of holding it. As the first stars appeared above the winter mountains, the Alpha King quietly made a decision that would soon reshape not only Claire's future, but the future of the entire kingdom. The following evening, the great courtyard of Silverkeep filled with people from every corner of the kingdom. Noble families stood beside village elders, merchants gathered beside soldiers, and children rested upon their parents' shoulders, eager to see the Alpha King after his miraculous return. Thousands of lanterns illuminated the palace walls, casting a warm golden glow across the fresh snow, while the 12 rescued wolves stood quietly upon the hillside overlooking the celebration. Their calm presence had already become the subject of countless conversations throughout the kingdom. Claire Bennett remained near the edge of the gathering, hoping to avoid attention. She believed the celebration belonged to the safe return of the king, not to her. She wore the same simple dress she had chosen for the journey home the following morning, refusing every elaborate gown the palace attendants had offered. She wished to leave Silverkeep remembered not for appearance, but for remaining true to herself. Trumpets sounded across the courtyard as Alexander Hawthorne stepped onto the grand stone platform before his people. The crowd immediately fell silent. His silver eyes slowly moved across the thousands gathered before finally resting upon Claire. "People of our kingdom," he began, his calm voice carrying effortlessly through the winter air. "Every generation is tested. Some are tested by war, others by hardship. We were tested by a frozen river and by one simple question. When another life is in danger, will we choose fear or compassion?" The crowd listened without a single interruption. Alexander continued. "Many have asked why I welcomed an ordinary Omega into this palace with the highest honor I could offer. My answer is simple. She did not know she was rescuing a king. She believed she was saving a stranger. That is why her kindness carries greater value than any title ever could." He extended one hand toward Claire, inviting her to stand beside him. Hesitantly, she stepped forward. The vast crowd watched in complete silence as she reached the platform. Her expression remained humble, almost uncertain, as though she still believed someone else deserved to stand there instead. Alexander looked at her with quiet admiration before turning once more toward the kingdom. Power can command obedience. Wealth can purchase comfort. Noble birth can inherit responsibility. But none of those gifts can create a compassionate heart. Character is built through choices, especially the choices made when no reward is expected. At that moment, The captain of the Royal Wolf Guard stepped forward carrying the silver collar that Claire had first seen beneath the frozen river. He respectfully presented it before the crowd. "This was recovered after the rescue," he announced. "The young woman before you held the symbol of the Alpha King in her hands, yet she never once asked what it meant. She simply continued saving a life." Quiet emotion spread through the gathering. Several nobles lowered their heads in reflection. Villagers who had traveled from Ashridge smiled proudly as they recognized the same gentle neighbor they had always known. Then, without any command from the throne, one member of the Royal Wolf Guard slowly knelt before Claire. A second guard followed. Then another. Within moments, every guard in silver armor had lowered themselves in silent respect. The gesture was not offered because she possessed royal blood. It was offered because she had demonstrated the highest form of honor through compassion alone. As the crowd witnessed the remarkable sight, countless people instinctively placed a hand over their hearts. In that unforgettable moment, an entire kingdom began measuring greatness not by the family into which someone was born, but by the kindness they freely chose to share with the world. Morning arrived beneath a clear winter sky, and the first rays of sunlight transformed the snow surrounding Silverkeep into a sea of shimmering silver. The palace courtyard filled once again, but this gathering felt different from every ceremony that had come before it. There were no anxious whispers, no uncertain glances, and no invisible walls separating nobles from villagers. Instead, people stood side by side, united by the story they had witnessed with their own eyes. Claire Bennett entered the courtyard wearing elegant ceremonial clothing crafted especially for the occasion, yet its simple design honored the humble village life she had never wished to leave behind. She walked with the same quiet grace that had carried her across the frozen river, her heart unchanged despite everything that had happened. Alexander Hawthorne waited beside the ancient stone platform where generations of rulers had made promises to protect the kingdom. As Claire approached, he stepped forward with a gentle smile that reflected admiration rather than authority. He looked across the gathered crowd before speaking. "A kingdom becomes stronger when it remembers that compassion is not weakness. It is the foundation upon which trust, courage, and lasting peace are built. The future of our people must never belong only to those born into privilege. It must also belong to those whose actions prove the strength of their character." Every word settled peacefully over the silent courtyard. An elderly nobleman, who had once questioned Claire's place, stepped forward first. He bowed respectfully before her. "Please accept my apology. I judged your place in this kingdom before I understood the greatness of your heart." Claire immediately helped him. "Stand. There is nothing to forgive," she answered warmly. "We all continue learning from one another." Her response drew quiet smiles throughout the crowd because it reflected the same kindness that had changed so many lives only days before. Alexander accepted a beautifully crafted silver crown from the royal attendant. It was elegant without unnecessary decoration, its design inspired by flowing winter branches and gentle snowfall. He paused before placing it upon Claire's head. "This crown is not a reward for saving my life," he said softly enough for the entire courtyard to hear. "It is a promise that this kingdom will always honor compassion wherever it is found. I ask you to stand beside me, not because destiny chose you before that day, but because your choices revealed the leader you already were." With great care, he placed the crown upon her head. The courtyard remained perfectly still for a single unforgettable moment. Then every member of the Royal Wolf Guard knelt once again. Noble families followed. Village elders lowered themselves with grateful hearts. Soon thousands of people stood united in one shared gesture of respect. Beyond the palace walls, the 12 majestic wolves lifted their heads toward the bright winter sky. Their peaceful howls echoed across the mountains, carrying hope instead of sorrow, as though the kingdom itself had been given a new beginning. Claire looked across the people before her and realized that the greatest gift she had received was never a crown. It was the opportunity to help build a future where every child would grow up believing that kindness could be stronger than fear, humility could be greater than pride, and true leadership always began with the courage to care for someone else. As snowflakes drifted gently through the golden morning light, Silverkeep entered a new chapter, forever remembering that the heart capable of saving one forgotten life could also inspire an entire kingdom to become better than it had ever imagined possible.